Please come closer, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك وسلم. Please come closer, inshallah. We are very honored today. We have Ustad Shammas Niazi, Sheikh Maulana Shammas Niazi. He was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and he went to school there, alhamdulillah. He started the hifz there. He finished the memorization of the Quran. Then he went on to Pakistan to study by Maulana Tariq Jamil Saab, his Madrasa al-Hasanain in Faisalabad, and he graduated studying from senior teachers like Sheikh Ramzi al-Habib, Sheikh Ubaidullah, Mufti Ahmad Ali, Maulana Tariq Jamil Sahab himself. And alhamdulillah, now he's an ustad and teacher at Madrasa al-Hasanain in Indianapolis. He teaches Sirah, Balagha, and Usul al-Fiqh, and Arabic literature. Today he will be addressing us regarding a very important topic, evaluating ethics, revelation as the objective standard of morality. And he'll be going over definitions of morality from recent theologians, morality before the advent of Islam, egotism, feminism, LGBTQ, etc. So please pay attention, inshallah, on these very important current issues so we can gain guidance from the Quran and Sunnah. Jazakumullahu Khairun.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Amma ba'd. Respected brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. The crowd looks, mashallah, not that awake. We didn't have dinner, or? I'll say assalamu alaikum one more time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That's better. So, before I get started, as Mufti Saab mentioned, I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. And Mufti Saab, as I'm sure a lot of you guys know, Mufti Minhajuddin was the imam there in St. Louis, Missouri for a period of time. And it was during that time that, alhamdulillah, through Mufti Saab's efforts, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He brought within me a change of heart, and I decided to memorize the Quran and also pursue the knowledge of deen. And that basically means that Mufti Minhaj is my teacher. He is my teacher. He did teach me Arabic, even though he denies it and he likes to disassociate himself from me. I don't know what the reason for that is, but anyhow, I consider Mufti Minhaj as my teacher, and for me, it's a strange disposition for me, a student, to come and speak in front of such great scholars, astute scholars, for me to come and share something. And mashallah, students have their notebooks open, and I don't know how much you'll be able to take from this, but inshallah, I'll try my best to present that which has come up to me, inshallah. So, first, I'm going to try to figure out how to operate this computer. So, I wanted to start off with the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, narrated by Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. In that, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كل كلام أو أمر ذي بال لا يفتح بذكر الله فهو أبتر أو قال أقطع. رواه الأحمد. Every matter of importance that is started without the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is cut, is incomplete. The word abtar in the Arabic language, it means to have something amputated, to have a limb cut off. So if we don't start with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, something of importance, then already that gathering or whatever is trying to be presented is void of barakah, is void of the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we start with Bismillah in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in hopes that inshallah whatever we learn today, inshallah it will be a means of benefit for us, inshallah. Now I have this very nice picture of a vacation spot. Hopefully all of us can go there. I honestly don't know myself where it is. But my wife, may Allah bless her, she pulled up I said, I need a picture of an ocean in my slide, in my presentation. And she's like, why do you want a picture of an ocean? The reason why I wanted this picture was to present to us that what we're trying to discuss today, the issue that is being brought forth today is an ocean. Is an ocean. I cannot possibly fit all of it into 1 hour. So the task that I've been given today is basically the task of putting an ocean into a bottle. Into this small bottle right here. So I'll try my best, inshallah, to present as much material as I've prepared, but there are no guarantees that I'll be able to go through all of it, inshallah. So I ask everyone to be patient, inshallah. So what are ethics? When it comes to ethics, when we talk about ethics and we talk about morality, what do these terms really mean? It's in Webster Dictionary, they define ethics as the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. Or ethics, plural in form but singular or plural in construction, the discipline dealing with what is good and bad and with moral duty and obligation. Dealing with what is good and bad. So to be able to differentiate between what is good and what is bad, what is haqq and what is batil, what is right and what is wrong. That is what we hope to achieve. That is what we as a society try to understand. And our ethics are based off of what? Our morals. And our morals are relating to the principles of right and wrong behavior. So the question is, where do we get our morals from? Any society. Where do we get our morals from? What do we define as right and what do we define as wrong? Now put religion to the side for a second, and if we look over the span of time, we'll find that one society may define one thing as right, and in another society, in another culture, that same exact thing may be wrong. It may be completely wrong. We're sitting at a dinner table, and you're sitting down, and usually the way it is if you sit down and you have food and then you let out a loud burp at the end of your meal, that's considered unethical. That's considered disrespectful. But in China, if you don't burp at the end of your meal, what's going to happen? That is considered disrespectful because that means you didn't enjoy the meal. So they consider not burping unethical. So each society has their own definition of what is right and wrong. What is right and what is wrong. Over here in the West, we have a different understanding of what is right and what is wrong. In the East, there's a different understanding of what is right and what is wrong. So now where do we as Muslims fall in all of this? That is what the topic is about today. What is our gauge? What is our guide in order to differentiate between right and wrong? The very first verse in Surah Al-Furqan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say? تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي نَزَّلَ الْفُرْقَانَ عَلَىٰ عَبَدِهِ لِيَكُونَ لِلْعَالَمِينَ نَذِيرًا. That this book that we see it on our shelves, and mashallah, the unfortunate truth is that we won't touch the Quran until Ramadan comes. And for us, it's become something more of a ritual. It's just something that will open up and we recite. We don't really understand what's being recited. We don't understand what's going on in Salah. But we just know that this is the Quran and it's meant to be read. We don't go beyond that. But what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in this verse? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي نَزَّلَ الْفُرْقَانِ. That this book, another one of the names of the Quran is what? What is another name of the Quran? Furqan. And what is Al-Furqan? What is it? It comes from the Arabic root word, and the etymology is fa-ra-qaf. Faraqa, farraqa yufarriqu. Farraqa yufarriqu means what? It means to split between two things, to separate the two. To separate the two. As it comes in the Quran. يُفَرِّقُونَ بِهِ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَزَوْجِهِ. That the angels, when they came down to the city of Babylon and then they were telling the people that we will teach you magic, they also gave a disclaimer and they said, the magic that we teach you, what does it do? يُفَرِّقُونَ بِهِ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَزَوْجِهِ. This magic, it separates between a husband and his wife. Tafriq, furqa. In the books of fiqh, we have the constant discussion of furqa. It's something that the judge is allowed to do, the judge can do. He separates between the husband and the wife. Furqa, it's called furqa, a split. So why is the Quran, why is it called Al-Furqan? Because the Quran, what it does for us, it splits the right from wrong. It puts the right on one side and it puts the wrong on one side. It puts the haqq on one side and it puts the batil on the other side. So that is one of the salient features of the Quran. That its very nature is to tell us this is right and this is wrong. So we don't need to look far to find our morals. We don't need to look far to find our ethics. They're right there on that shelf. They're right there in the Quran for you and I to read, for you and I to inculcate into our lives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has called it Al-Furqan. So why do we need to look left and right? Why do we need to look here and there? And the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also indicates that according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is a right and there is a wrong, as viewed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is what? Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinabah. Ya Allah, show us the right, show us haqq as haqq. Give us the ability to see what is right as right, and give us the ability then thereafter to follow it. And show us what is wrong as wrong, and give us the ability to abstain from that. Look at the power, look at the wording of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Just this itself, this dua itself, I could speak about this dua for 1 hour. And I'm not exaggerating. The Prophet ﷺ, his dua is what? Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa. Show us the truth as it is perceived to be, as it's supposed to be understood as truth. Because a lot of times what happens is that you and I, we don't realize what the haqq is. What is right and what is wrong. What is right and what is wrong. Brother, it's not okay for you to invest over here. It's not okay for you to invest because this company has the tendency to invest in haram ventures. But we don't see that. We don't see it as haqq. We say, no, brother, alhamdulillah, I did my research on Google and I pulled out this fatwa from this one sheikh who lives in this village in Jordan. And alhamdulillah, that's the fatwa that I follow. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqa. Ya Allah, show us the truth as truth. And then when we recognize that this is the truth, give us the ability to follow it. Wa arina al-batila batilan. And Ya Allah, show us that which is incorrect as incorrect, and give us the ability to abstain. You're telling someone, brother, what you're doing is wrong. Brother, what you're doing is wrong. You can't have a savings account because you get interest from that. Oh, brother, it's just a little bit of money. It's not that big a deal. He doesn't see the wrong as wrong, and he doesn't abstain from it. It's one thing to commit a sin, but then to commit the sin, to commit that sin and not admit that it is a sin is a bigger sin than the initial sin. It's a tongue twister. Say that fast 10 times. To commit that sin is a sin in and of itself. That's the first mistake. Then after that, when you and I, we fail to recognize that that is a sin, that is tantamount to kufr. Brother, brother, you're not praying, what's wrong? You're not praying, it's okay, I don't have to pray. First, we need to understand that that is a sin. Because if we don't, that person who rejects that salah is a part of deen, that this is an integral part of faith, then that person unfortunately has left the fold of Islam. And then I have here a hadith Qudsi about wilayah. What hadith is this? Narrated by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. And in this hadith, what is a hadith Qudsi? It is that hadith which is narrated to us by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but the words are the words of Allah. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, قال Allah, من عادى لي وليا فقد آذنته بالحرب. Whoever takes a friend of mine, a wali of mine, as an enemy, then I have declared war against that person. I have declared war against that person. And then the hadith goes on, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says what? That a slave, he continues to do nawafil. A slave he'll do the fara'id. He first does the fara'id. He's praying his salah on time. And he's fasting as he should be. Or the brother or sister is praying as they should be, fasting, giving zakah as they should be. And now they take it a step further and they start performing nawafil, doing extra good deeds. Tahajjud in the night, recitation of the Quran. And they become closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So much so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, then what happens? كنت سمعه الذي يسمع به وكنت بصره الذي يبصر به وكنت رجله التي يمشي بها وكنت يده التي يبطش بها أو كما قال. That I become this person's hands by which he grasps things, by which he holds on to things. I become this person's legs by which he walks. I become this person's vision by which he sees. I become this person's hearing by which he listens. What does this hadith mean? It means that this person, when he becomes so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he starts seeing everything as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires us to see it. That he will not walk to haram. He will not walk to haram because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it impossible for him to walk to haram. He will not reach for haram wealth. He will not reach for that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is holding him back from that. He will not look at haram, listen to haram, speak of haram. Everything that he sees is what, by the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants him to see it. So all of this is proving what? That our deen has brought for us a code. Our deen has brought for us a code of ethics. It's all in the Quran. It's all in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Our deen is timeless. It's not restricted by one time. For a person to sit here and say that your deen only applied to whatever was being practiced 1400 years ago, but nowadays we have so many different things. You have so many different things happening that the deen can't keep up. That the deen can't keep up. That is absolute blasphemy. That one could level such an accusation against the deen. That we can say that our deen does not keep up with the times. But rather, it is our understanding of the Quran and the Hadith that is warped. It's our understanding of the Quran and the Hadith that is misconstrued. Where we think that we don't have a way of life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, Fitrat Allah. Fitrat Allah. That there is a pure nature that has been given to each and every single human being. There is a way of life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made for you and I. But it's our job to dive into the Quran and dive into the Hadith and extract these ethics. It's our job to learn and take our morality from the Deen and not from the society around us. So in order to understand, to fully grasp how the Quran has an impact on our morality, how the Quran has an impact on our ethics, we need to understand the state of the non-Muslims before the Quran was revealed. We need to understand the time period in which the Quran was revealed, in which the Prophet ﷺ was sent. Before the advent of Islam, so many different vices would take place. So many different atrocities would take place on a daily basis because they had no sense of direction, no moral compass to guide them. Nothing at all. The Quran, it dealt with their issues. Just like how we see that the Quran is dealing with our issues today. And I will get into what the problems were in each of these three subjects that I want to discuss today. So when we look at our society today, what ails us the most, or what ails us in greater volume than anything else, to me personally, I feel like it's these three things. These are the things that we really have a hard time coping with, we have a hard time understanding as a society, especially growing up here in the West. So how are we to understand these things in the light of Islam? The first thing that I want to talk about, something that is ingrained in our minds at a young age, is the whole phenomenon of it's my way or the highway. That it's me and nothing else matters. The whole world revolves around me and nothing else. Nothing else. We're very self-absorbed. We don't take out the time to appreciate those that are around us. And that's the way that society has built us from a young age, all the time. That it's us, we are the ones who are doing everything. Our parents have no role in this. That if a person attains a degree or whatever it may be, you reach a certain level, you reach a certain status in your life, that's solely because of the individual effort of yourself. But this was something that the Quran is mentioned all throughout, that is mentioned throughout the Quran, that is mentioned throughout the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And what is that? So what I want to talk about is egotism. So what is egotism? Egotism is the practice of talking and thinking about oneself excessively because of undue sense of self-importance. It's the practice of talking and thinking about oneself excessively because of an undue sense of self-importance. So we literally think that everything revolves around us. Any type of achievement that I have, it's solely because of my effort and my effort alone. And we think that just because of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, we're unstoppable. And who made this claim before? The people of Ad. In Surah Fussilat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions their claim, Man ashaddu minna quwwa. Who is stronger than us? Nothing can take us down. No power can stop us. We are self-built. And what happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He destroyed that nation. But an individual example that really, it's kind of synonymous with all of us is the story of Qarun. It's mentioned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Qarun. And He says, إِنَّ قَارُونَ كَانَ مِنْ قَوْمِ مُوسَى فَبَغَى عَلَيْهِمْ وآتيناه من الكنوز ما إن مفاتحه لتنوء بالعصبة أولي القوة. So the phenomenon of Qarun was what? He was alive during the time of Musa. And various mufassirin, Ibn Kathir rahimullah as well, he mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a certain type of knowledge. He gave him a very specific type of knowledge. And this knowledge it gave him unlimited and an undisclosed amount of wealth. Uncharted. He had so much wealth. That just the treasures to his wealth, he would carry the keys around in caravans. And he would hire armed guards to protect just the keys. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? إِنَّ قَارُونَ كَانَ مِنْ قَوْمِ مُوسَى فَبَغَى عَلَيْهِمْ وَآتِنَاهُ مِنَ الْكُنُوزِ مَا إِنَّ مَفَاتِحَهُ لَتَنُوءُ بِالْعُصْبَةِ. Just the keys themselves were so weighty and so heavy that Qarun required armed guards at all times. But yet this gift was given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does Qarun say? And his people, what did they say to him? لا تفرح إن الله لا يحب الفرحين. And وأحسن كما أحسن الله إليك. Do good to others as good has been done to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did good to you, so why don't you do good to others? And what did Qarun say in response? He said, إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي. And this is what we say today, time and time again, that this is all because of me. إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي. This is because of my knowledge. No one else has any role in this. This is because I work day and night. That now I'm the chief surgeon over here in such and such hospital. The reason why I'm at the position I am today is because I worked hard, not because of anyone else. It's my effort that got me here today. And this thought process is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes. To such a degree, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He dislikes it, that even when a Nabi, Musa alayhi salam, made a claim, not out of arrogance, but just as a matter of fact. What happened? Musa alayhi salam was standing and he was addressing his people. And he's talking to them. And he says to them, and he's giving his talk. And then one of the uncles of the community, mashallah, they stand up and they say, Man a'lamun nas? Musa, I have a question for you. Who's the most knowledgeable of all the people? And so Musa alayhi salam, he didn't say it out of arrogance. He didn't say it because he was being proud. Rather, he said it as a matter of fact, that this is what I know. Revelation is being given to me. No one else is receiving revelation. So therefore, the logical choice is myself. I'm the most knowledgeable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not like this act. Even though at face value it may have been true. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He disliked this act from Musa alayhi salam. And then He tasked Musa alayhi salam to travel and go to Al-Khadir. And we know the story of Al-Khadir. I'm not pronouncing it the way we usually pronounce it. Khizr is the way we pronounce it, but the correct pronunciation is what? Al-Khadir. And so Al-Khadir alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you go and you learn from this individual. He is the most knowledgeable. And in reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him a different type of knowledge. A knowledge that was not given to Musa alayhi salam. Of what would happen in the future as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reveal it to him. So now, Musa alayhi salam, he embarks on this journey, and hopefully we read this story every Friday, inshallah. Because it's mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf. It's mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf. And what's not mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf, though, is a exchange that took place between Musa alayhi salam and Al-Khadir. They're traveling on the boat that Al-Khadir, he pulled a plank from, and he caused damage to the boat so that the king would not steal the boat after seeing that the boat was damaged. So while they're traveling on this boat, And this is a Sahih narration narrated by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us this story. And he's saying that while they are in the boat, a bird comes and it sits on the ledge of the boat. Right on the edge. And this bird, what it does is it ever so slightly, it puts its beak into the water. And it pulls it back up. And then a drop of water falls off the beak of the bird. And Al-Khadir alayhi salam, he looks at the bird. And he looks at Musa alayhi salam. And he says, Ilmi wa ilmuka. My knowledge and your knowledge. So these are arguably the two most knowledgeable people at the time. Because Musa alayhi salam, he says, Ana a'lamun nas. I'm the one who has the most knowledge. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no, you're not the one with the most knowledge. Rather, Al-Khadir is. So you have arguably two of the most knowledgeable people on this boat. They're standing there. And Al-Khadir, he looks at Musa alayhi salam and he says, Ilmi wa ilmuka. My knowledge and your knowledge. In comparison to the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is like the drop of water that fell off the beak of the bird and the rest of the ocean. Allah's knowledge is the ocean, and my knowledge and your knowledge combined is that drop of water. But what do we say? That if I get a degree, if I have an MD, if I'm an orthopedic surgeon, I've already done takhassus in fiqh, I've already become a mufti, I've already become an engineer, I'm an accountant, I'm a know-it-all. I have all the knowledge in the world. And then what do I say? I'm the most knowledgeable person. And then I don't thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala either. What is different between this individual and Qarun when he said, إِنَّمَا أُوتِيتُهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ عِنْدِي, that this is all because of me. This is my success. What have you done? So this, it goes against the teachings of Islam, what we're taught, that it's all about you. It's all about you. Don't adjust to the way people are around you. Rather, you should be the way you are. Be stubborn. Don't learn to adapt. The Prophet ﷺ, one of his characteristics was what? That he was approachable by any and all different types of people. People from all walks of life, they were able to interact with the Prophet ﷺ. Because he ﷺ was not egotistical. So what is one of the cures of this? That we constantly, we make a dua. We make a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we say, Allahumma ja'alni fi ayni saghira wa fi a'yunin nasi kabira. Ya Allah, in my own sight, the way I perceive myself, Ya Allah, let me perceive myself to be insignificant. And the way people perceive me, let them perceive me to be great. But I myself need to understand that anything that I do is solely by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What would the Anbiya alayhimu salatu wasalam say? وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. That this is all due to the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where I am today, if a brother is able to donate to the masjid, let us not consider those who work at the masjid or those individuals who are now involved in the masjid to be our slaves. Let us not consider that, oh, I did good to you, therefore you are indebted to me for the rest of your life. This is an ihsan. This is a favor that you have done for the people, just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done a favor upon us. Because if it were up to Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can very easily take that blessing away from us. Now, and again, I'm only touching on these topics very briefly. Each topic could be discussed in thorough detail at another time. But just to kind of give a preview, I wanted to discuss these three things. Hopefully we get into the last part as well, inshallah. Another problem that we have today, and this is probably one of the most difficult things for us to understand and to wrap our minds around, is the whole gender equality argument. The gender equality argument. The argument is what? The argument is that anything a man is entitled to, a woman should also be entitled to. And so the flaw in that ideology is what? That what has happened is the male has been made as the example. The male has been made as the as the platform that one needs to achieve, that one needs to reach in order to consider themselves equal. But what has Islam taught us? What does Islam tell us about this? وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. And the male is not like the female. They're both different. They're both different. Each one, they have their own rights. And this is something that Mufti bin Haji explained a while back. Says that the rights, they may be different. The rights are different, but that doesn't mean that these two individuals are not equal. So just because a male has the ability to lead salah, just because a male has the ability to lead salah, does not mean that if a woman does not lead salah, she's equal to that male. Just because a male is the one who is going to give the talk from the minbar, does not mean that the woman who does not is not equal to that male. Because how many sisters are praying individually? They are not leading the prayer, they are not giving the talk, but they are better in status and in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the one who is leading salah himself. Why is that made the standard? Because that is the way society wants us to think. That the standard is the male. If you do not have what the male has, then you are not equal. Since when has the male become the standard? Since when has he become the standard of equality? But that is what has been ingrained in our minds. That if and only if we attain the standard or we reach the standard of the male, is the woman considered equal. And now I want to go back to the state of the non-believers before the Quran. So before the Quran was revealed and before Islam, before the Prophet ﷺ was sent, how were women in society treated? In a juz that hopefully everyone here has memorized, or in a surah that everyone has memorized, the ayah goes, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ. And when that young girl who has been buried will be asked on the Day of Judgment, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ. We don't know this surah. بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. What is the sin that caused her death? A Sahabi is sitting in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's crying profusely. He can't contain himself. He's crying. The Prophet ﷺ, he asks him, مَا يُبْكِيكَ? What's making you cry? And the Sahabi looks at the Prophet ﷺ, he says, you don't know what I did before Islam. You don't know what I've done. And then he starts to narrate his story. And his story goes as such. This was before Islam. So in order for us to understand where the status of women was and where it is now, how much status Islam actually gave women. So this Sahabi is sitting with the Prophet ﷺ and he's telling his story. And he says that, my wife, she was pregnant. And it just so happened that towards the end of her pregnancy, I went out to Syria on a business trip. And when I went out on the trip, my wife, she gave birth. She gave birth. And then some time was, obviously, it wasn't, he didn't catch a flight. He didn't have a round trip to Syria. It took some time to go there and get back, right? They used to travel by camelback. So it took him some time to get back. And when he came back, he found a girl in his house, a young girl. And the wife, she did not want the child to be buried alive. Because the custom of the Arabs was what? That if a daughter was born, what would they do? They would bury the girl alive. Why? Because it was considered a blemish on that family. أَيُمْسِكُهُ عَلَى هُونٍ أَمْ يَدُسُّهُ فِي التُّرَابِ. That was the question that they would ask themselves, as it's mentioned in the Quran. أَيُمْسِكُهُ عَلَى هُونٍ. Will he retain this girl and then be forced to listen to the chastisement of his community members, of those around him. Oh, you had a girl. Arun alayk. That's a shame upon you. That's a shame upon your family. This is what was said on a regular basis. This was the status of a woman before Islam. And then he had a choice. Either he keeps her and he goes through the ridicule and he has to hear everything, or yadussuhu fit turab. He buries that child in the ground. And they would bury their daughters alive. And so now this companion, before Islam, he comes back home. And his wife, she comes up with a plan. And she says, I'm going to tell him that this is not your daughter. Rather, this is your sister's daughter. And I took her in out of fear of her being buried alive. So I took her in myself. And I want us to raise her. And he was okay with that. He said, okay, it's not my daughter, so that's not a blemish on me, on my family. I don't have to hear the ridicule that this is your daughter. This is someone else's daughter. It's fine. And so now what happens is he starts taking care of her, and she's growing up in his house, and they form a bond. And now this young girl, she's around 2 to 3 years old, and she starts calling him Baba. She starts calling him father, dad. And she's playing with him. And they form such a strong relationship. It seems unbreakable. And so the wife, she sees that now the husband's heart has become soft. Now's the time for me to ask for his credit card. No, she didn't ask for his credit card. But what did she do? She went to him and she said, what? His heart is now soft. Now's the time for me to tell the truth. And she goes to her husband and she informs him and she tells him. Remember, and what did she told her husband? I left that part out. When he came back, he asked about what happened to the child. Where's the baby? She said it was a miscarriage. The baby died and we took care of the child. We buried the child. Now she tells him, remember when you came back from that business trip? And I had told you that the child died, it was a miscarriage, and I buried the child? I lied. This is your child. This is your daughter. This is your daughter. And I did that in hopes that you would not bury our daughter alive. And so what does he do? He's quiet. He takes his daughter outside. He grabs a shovel and he starts digging. He starts digging. He's pulling the dirt up from the ground. He's putting it in a heap. And now the young girl, completely oblivious as to what is about to happen, she takes her little hands and she starts scooping the dirt up with her father and starts helping him. Now the father, he's knee deep in the ground. And now dirt is getting onto his beard, and she starts cleaning his beard. And this whole time he's crying, he can't control himself. For what he's about to do is it's not allowed, it's not even, who could possibly do such a thing? And he's taking his daughter and he puts her in the ground and he starts putting the dirt on top of her. And she starts asking him, Baba, what are you doing? What are you doing? And the last thing that he hears as he covers her face with the dirt is Baba, Baba, Baba. And now come back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's in tears. And he's torn up. Why? Because he did not have this religion. Islam was not there. Al-Furqan was not there. The criterion was not there to tell him that these girls are just as beloved. They should be just as beloved to you as your sons. They have just as much rights over you as parents as your sons do. Because if it were for the Quran, he would have his daughter with him on that day. And he's crying in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, he's crying as well. And he says to him, Al-Islamu yajubbu ma qablahu. Al-Islamu yajubbu ma qablahu. Don't worry, because Islam, it deletes and it erases any sins that may have been committed before Islam. That was the status of women. And when the Quran came, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revealed a chapter called An-Nisa, the chapter of the women. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He told us to do good to our wives, to do good to the females of our family. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to do. He gave, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed for them inheritance. When in that society, giving inheritance to a girl was considered a sin. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed it for the woman. This is where Islam brought the status of a woman. And yet today we ask ourselves and we say, how come a woman is not allowed to lead the prayer? How come a woman is not allowed to give khutbah? Because each person, the male and the female, they have their own individual roles in society. Not to say that one is more important than the other. Not to say that one is more important than the other. If you look at a watch, the watch has 3 hands, right? Generally, let's say it doesn't have a second hand. It has an hour hand and it has a minute hand. The hour hand is shorter than the minute hand, right? Or we don't use watches anymore. The hour hand is shorter than the minute hand. It may seem smaller, but does that mean that the minute hand is more important than the hour hand? Both are equally important. And if the hour hand says, I want to be as long and as tall as the minute hand, then that defeats the purpose of the hour hand. You can't tell what hour it is and what minute it is. So just because the rights of a woman are different, the role of the woman is different in society, does not mean that she's not as important as the male. Because if there was no woman, if there was no Adam, if there was no Hawa, then we wouldn't have any children. You and I, we wouldn't be sitting here today. We wouldn't be sitting here today. So it's important for us to understand that even though the rights may not be the same, that does not mean they are not equal. Just because the rights are different does not mean that the rights are unequal. Each one has their own rights. Now can a husband say that, hey, you know what, after the baby is born, I also want a 40-day break? Right? What am I talking about? When a woman gives birth to a child, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives her 40 days off. No prayer, no fasting, nothing. Rest. Why? Because Allah knows what the woman went through. Now you and I, can we sit there and we say we also want 40 days off? We've also been through a lot. That is something that was given to the woman by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But can you and I sit here and say that that's unfair? No, we can't. Because our rights are different. Our rights are different. And one of the biggest objections made against Islam is that Islam is oppressive. I don't even know if we'll be able to get into LGBTQ. How are we doing on time? Who's my time guy? No one? So, I'll finish off this chapter with this hadith. One of the biggest objections made is that Islam is oppressive towards women. Right? How can you bundle them up and, they wear scarves and this, that, and Islam is so oppressive and blah, blah, blah. And then one of the things that is quoted, and mashallah, even some of our brothers themselves, I have a clock. I just need to know what time I have. I have the time right here. I have it on my phone. I have it everywhere. But one of the objections that is made, and something that you and I, we also say that, hopefully, not me, inshallah, I can't make that claim, but some of our brothers, what they say is, they say what? You go home, there's a little bit too much salt in your food, and you say, what? Tu to hai teri. You were created from a crooked rib. You were created from the crooked rib. Don't you know the hadith? And that's a hadith that we all have memorized. And it's always ready, locked and loaded. You were created from the crooked rib. That's why you're crooked. Ya Allah, that's not even the understanding of the hadith. The hadith is not to say, because the Prophet ﷺ, what does he say in the hadith? That the woman خُلِقَتِ الْمَرْأَ مِنَ الضِّلْعِ الْمُعْوَجِ, that the woman was created from the crooked rib. So that therefore means that the woman is crooked. Alhamdulillah, now I can use this hadith against my wife and everyone else. That's what that means, right? What does it mean? What does it mean? MashaAllah, I know we probably have a handful of doctors in here. Now, can any doctor, I have no medical knowledge, but can any doctor sitting here tell me that the rib itself, it's faulty, that its design there's a mistake in the design, that it shouldn't be crooked, that your rib should actually be straight, and that's just a flaw in the design of the rib? No one is going to say that. The rib is meant to have that curvature. It's meant to be crooked. It's not to say the woman is meant to be crooked. I'll get to what I'm trying to say. The rib is meant to be crooked. Why? Because it's protecting what? What's inside is protecting the lungs. And if our ribs were to be straight and pointy, then our Eid hugs, on the first hug, the person would die. Now, you don't even have to worry about the second and the third Eid hug. Right? Immediately, that person will be dead right there on the spot. If our ribs were straight and pointy. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them because there's a purpose behind the curvature. The purpose is to protect what's inside. We may see the rib as crooked, but in the eyes of Allah, it's perfect. That's the way it should be. You see the woman as crooked, you see her as different from yourself, but that's the beauty of the woman. That's how she should be. She's meant to be that way. You may see it as flawed because you see with a different lens. You and I, we see with a different lens. We see the woman in a different light. She doesn't act like us. She doesn't talk like us. You know, honey, what's wrong? What's going on? Nothing. I don't want to talk about it. No, please tell me, man, why aren't you like my boys? My boys are like, all right, what's up? No, it doesn't matter. Let's go out to eat something. Why can't you be like that? Yeah, she's not made that way. That's not the way she's supposed to be. So to object and take this hadith and say the Prophet ﷺ said that women are crooked, that's an accusation against the Prophet ﷺ. That's an accusation against this beautiful deen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never said such a thing. The Prophet ﷺ never said such a thing. Rather, the woman is made that way to protect you, just as the rib protects the lungs. She's made that way to protect you. Now all the students are going to want to go and they're going to go home. They're going to call home, I need that crooked rib. Mom, Dad, I need that crooked rib. Because I just realized it's not actually crooked. That's the way it's supposed to be. So now when you go home, the wives are going to be waiting there that you can't use this hadith against me anymore. I'm not crooked, that's the way I'm supposed to be. The way I've been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you just can't see the beauty in it. That's what this hadith means. Not that the woman is crooked, brothers and sisters. That's not what it means. And there are obviously more things that we can discuss, but this is one of the biggest things that is held, that is used against us as Muslims, that there's always this narrative that women are lesser than men when that is not the case. And then we could talk about the whole story of Maryam alayhi salam at another time, inshallah. Lastly, the last thing that I want to get into is the whole LGBTQ phenomenon. Mainly, what I want to talk about today is homosexuality in the light of Islam. Why is it considered a sin? And the people who propagate and advocate for homosexuality, what are their arguments? And what are the answers to those arguments? And inshallah, we'll finish with this. First, we need to understand that Islam, across the board, consensus, has deemed homosexuality to be impermissible. And the ayahs that I have here are from the Surah Shu'ara, and it's about the people of Lut. Okay? Actually, I don't think it's... Where is this? Oh, subhanallah. My wife put the wrong ayah in. Yeah, I can blame her on this one. Maybe I'll use the crooked rib. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to use the crooked rib. But anyhow, these are not the verses that I wanted to select from here. The verses are from Surah Shu'ara, from 160 to 170. And that discusses the
the predicament that Lut alayhi salam had to face with his people. And what was that predicament? The predicament was كذبت قوم لوط للمرسلين إذ قال لهم أخوهم لوط ألا تتقون إني لكم رسول أمين فاتقوا الله وأطيعون وما أسألكم عليه من أجر إن أجري إلا على رب العالمين أتأتون الذكران من العالمين. So from here, Lut, he tells his people what was common amongst them. Amongst them, they were interested in the same sex. They were interested in the same gender. They had desires for the same gender. And they would exercise those desires and they would fulfill those desires. And this was something that Lut alayhi salam was sent his people to warn them about and to tell them that this was impermissible. And what Lut alayhi salam, he says, أَتَأْتُونَ الذُّكْرَانَ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. Do you approach the males from the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He's addressing the males and he tells them, you approach males from the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَتَذَرُونَ مَا خَلَقَ لَكُمْ رَبُّكُمْ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ عَادُونَ. And you leave behind your wives and your spouses that have been made permissible for you, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for you. بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ عَادُونَ. Rather, nay, you are a people that transgress. You are the people who cross the bounds. So from this, from قَوْمٌ عَادُونَ, we deduce that this act is impermissible. And there is also a punishment that we won't get into right now. It's not in the scope of our conversation. But there's also a capital punishment that is given to those two individuals who commit in this act. Those two individuals who commit this act. And so what happened? Lut alayhi salam, he makes a dua and he says, رَبِّ نَجِّنِي وَأَهْلِي مِمَّا يَعْمَلُونَ فَنَجَّيْنَاهُ وَأَهْلَهُ أَجْمَعِينَ إِلَّا عَجُوزًا فِي الْغَابِرِينَ ثُمَّ دَمَّرْنَا الْآخَرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he did away with the people of Lut and he destroyed them and he saved Lut alayhi salam. And he destroyed them because of what? They rejected the message and they were involved in acts of homosexuality. So this is the stance of Islam on this act, that it is impermissible. And one of the arguments that is made is that a person is created this way. It's genetic. It's genetic. That the individual has been created in such a manner that they can't help it. That why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put this in them if it were to be impermissible? Why would Allah put this desire within them if it was impermissible to begin with? Why even have that inclination? That's one of their strongest arguments. And Shaykh Abdullah, in an article that he wrote about Islam and homosexuality, Shaykh Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, what he writes is that if you want to talk about genetics, and if you want to actually talk about how this is proven, or they were created this way, then you would need to actually have a case study. But the issue is that there is no such study. Nothing has really been researched to this degree. Because an issue is the homosexual community, they're not very forthcoming about this kind of information. Because they themselves want to justify their actions by using this as a model, by using this as a means of conveyance, by saying that we were created this way. But in reality, it could have been, it's more because of society than anything. It's more because of our environment, the environment that we live in. The environment that we live in. And what can we say about the environment? We live in such a time where things that you and I, we would consider innocent, have now been riddled and filled with innuendos and small isharat towards homosexuality. How so? Now, I remember as a kid, I used to watch a show called Arthur on PBS. I don't know how many people have watched Arthur. I used to watch Arthur all the time. Arthur the Aardvark used to come home and I used to get on that stuff. I used to come home and I always used to watch Arthur, 3 p.m. Come straight home. Mom, don't bother me. Gotta watch Arthur. Give me my pasta. Give me this. Give me my cookies. It's time for Arthur. I sit down and I watch Arthur on his adventures. Arthur the Aardvark. And so the show Arthur, what's the premise of the show? You have a whole bunch of animals. Okay? And these animals are able to talk to one another. So it's kind of like Kalila wa Dimna. If anyone's read the book, Kalila wa Dimna, the Arabic book. It's a book in adab. It's a book in literature in Arabic. Or Aesop's fables. So these animals are made to talk to one another. So Arthur himself is an aardvark, and then you have a mouse, I think it's Muppy, and then you have DW, also Arthur's sister, and then you have his best friend Buster. Thank you. You have his best friend Buster, who's a bunny. So you have all these different animals interacting with one another. And so it's a children's show, correct? Now, whatever you and we teach a child, whatever image we put in a child's mind, that will last for a very long time. And that will have a lasting effect on the child. A long-lasting effect. They had a teacher, Mr. Ratburn. I don't know what animal, I think he was a mouse too. But Mr. Ratburn, he's their third grade teacher. He's a math teacher. And he had this crazy affinity for cake. He would love cake and all that. Okay, so I'm not going to get into the whole show. Maybe you could go home and watch a YouTube video or something like that. I don't advocate and I don't condone that you watch the show, but just to get an idea. So now Mr. Ratburn is their third grade math teacher. Fast forward 20 years. Just recently, 2019, they came out with a new episode. And in that episode, the class takes a field trip to Mr. Ratburn's wedding. And in that wedding, he's getting married to another man. This is what our children are watching. This is what they're growing up with. Other cartoons, other shows, you have it openly. Two girls being intimate, two guys being intimate. It's commonplace now. It's the norm. And this is being ingrained within our children's minds. And so now when that happens, I ask you, when our children, they see Mr. Ratburn getting married to another guy, they say, Dad, why did you marry Mama? Why didn't you marry Mama's brother? We will get asked this question, brothers and sisters. It's a reality that we have to face because of the society that we live in. Because of the way that society and because of the way the current system is drilling these things into our children's minds. So it's passed off as something innocent. And it's the society that teaches you that this is something that is perfectly fine. And even now, you look back at different television shows. You look back at SpongeBob. I'm about to ruin a whole bunch of people's childhood. You look back at SpongeBob. Now the creators themselves, they come out and they say something along the lines of what? They say something like, yeah, SpongeBob was homosexual the whole time and he had a love interest in Patrick. J.K. Rowling, the author of which book? Harry Potter. She came out and she confirmed that Dumbledore was in fact a homosexual, which is part of the reason why he had such an affinity for Harry. Now when a person reads that and says and sees the innocence of it all, wouldn't that person think, well, hey, what's wrong with this? It's our society that teaches us this. If someone is coming and telling us that they were created this way, we don't really have any evidence for that, but we do have evidence of the opposite, and that is that society is ingraining this and drilling this into our minds. And they're making this the norm. It's considered a taboo in one society, but in another, it's completely normal. And the same author, Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, he speaks about a people, if I'm not mistaken, in Africa. It was considered in their way of life, heterosexual marriage was considered a crime. And homosexual marriage was considered the norm. Because that was the society that they lived in. So for us to say that, and so now that's where that's what this whole talk is about. Where do we draw the line? Where does Al-Furqan come in? Where do we differentiate between right and wrong? When do we say that, okay, reason has a place here and reason does not? We can't use reason here. Rather, it should be revelation. We should apply the laws of Islam. We should apply the rules of the Quran here. Even though seemingly it may seem, someone may make the argument, and another argument that is made is what? Is that what's wrong with two individuals who love each other? And that's a very common argument. These two individuals, they love each other. What do you have? What's wrong with you? Why do you have to say anything about it? The issue with that is that just because you have love for something doesn't make it okay, doesn't make it right. And I want to share a story. This happened a few years back, and that's why I have this bullet point over here, Ohio story. There was a man by the name of Ariel Castro. And I'm sure some of you may have heard or read about the story. He was in Cleveland, and what he had done was he kidnapped a few girls. One by the age of 14, one by the age of 17, another by the age of 21 or so. And what he did was he locked them in his basement. He locked them in his basement. Not for a few days, but almost for 10 years. 10 years. And long story short, one of the girls eventually broke out, and she kicked open the door, and there's that whole famous, the African-American guy who, he was like, I was calling McDonald's, I was eating my McGriddle, and this girl came up on the door, and I saw this girl, she was kicking the door, and then I said, yo, there's a girl up in this place. I need to go save her. And so he goes over there and he saves this girl, and now McDonald's has given him free food for the rest of his life. But that's not the moral of the story. The moral of the story is not that if you save a damsel in distress, you'll get free McDonald's for the rest of your life. The moral is that after everything was said and done, this person was brought to trial. And now the judge asks him, he says to him, I'm not quoting him verbatim, but he says to this individual, Ariel Castro, justify your actions. Justify what you've done. He said, I can't justify what I've done. But what I can say is that from the bottom of my heart, I did love these girls. That's it. So in his mind, it was his love that validated what he did. And then a priest commented on that. I can't remember the exact article, but a priest commented on that. And he said, this is the exact same problem that homosexuals deal with. That they say, I love this individual, therefore my actions are justified. But we need to realize that just because you love an individual does not make it okay for you to act on that love. Does not make it okay for you to go down the wrong route in regards to that. Love does not justify everything. You can't use that as an argument. And then one brings up the argument, well, why does, and then hopefully we'll finish with this. Because the reality is that we know certain individuals, brothers and sisters, who have these tendencies. And I know the uncles that are sitting here, or the aunties that are sitting here, they may not want to hear this, but this is the raw truth. That there are individuals out there, people maybe sitting in this very gathering, who have these tendencies, who are inclined to the same gender. But just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put that inclination there, does not mean that it's okay for us to act on that. And I'll give an example. The person who has this inclination and the person who doesn't. It's the same exact thing as a person who has an inclination to do drugs and a person who doesn't. A person has the inclination to smoke, or he has the inclination to drink, to do something haram. That doesn't mean that he has the inclination that something is wrong with that individual. That just means that shaitan is working on you. Shaitan is doing his job. So first we need to understand those individuals who have these tendencies, we should not outcast them. We should not say to them that something is, you should not be a member of society, or something is really wrong with you. Because how many people in this same gathering have tendencies to commit haram that are not this act? So just because the tendency is there does not make that person sinful. It's what we do about that tendency that matters. Which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, which is why the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us, a person who in his mind has the intention to do something bad, but he doesn't do it, he will be rewarded for abstaining from that haram. So a person who has these tendencies, and yet knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it haram, abstains from that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward that individual, not punish. Reward that individual. But if that person is to act on these tendencies, that's when that person will become sinful. That's when the problem comes. When a person acts on those haram, on those tendencies. So, just to conclude, these individuals who have these tendencies, it's very important for us to understand that they are a part of our community. They are a part of our community, and that these individuals, what it is that these individuals, they need help. These individuals, they need motivation. And there are people who have recovered. I remember reading an article on Muslim Matters. This is about, someone wrote this article anonymously, but they wrote this article, and in this article they wrote it because they wanted to show other people who had the same predicament that I can still function in society. So this person, he wrote, and he said that he was a leader, an imam in a masjid. An imam in a masjid. And this individual has this issue. He has these tendencies, these homosexual tendencies. But yet this individual was married and had children. And he wrote this article, why? To show that I have these tendencies, but yet I fight the urge. Because this is my battle with shaitan. Your battle may be something else. Your battle may be, don't invest in something haram. Your battle may be, don't drink. Your battle may be, don't do drugs. Your battle may be, don't do zina. But for another individual, their battle is this. And each person, when they struggle in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will reward them. Allah will reward this individual. So it's important for us to, and then at the end of the day, and I promise, inshallah, I'll finish with this. Whenever something is not understood by our intellect, we can't grasp something, we can't grasp a concept. Reason is telling us one thing, and the Quran is telling us something else. The Sunnah is telling us one thing, and reason is telling us something else. Reason is telling us, hey, this should be permissible, or this should be okay. Society is saying this should be okay. At that point in time, you and I, what do? We say that Aslamtu lillahi rabbil alameen. That what does it mean to be Muslim? That's what it boils down to. What is Islam? Islam is to submit. To submit. You may have those people like, oh yeah, totally, Islam is like about peace. Islam is about doves in the air. And it's just so, that's what Islam is. That's not what Islam means. Unfortunately, that's not what it means. Islam, it means submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That when you and I, our minds are telling us something else, that this should be okay, I should be able to do this, why can't I act on this tendency of mine? That's when we say, I submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about these individuals. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ. Do you not see that person who follows his own whims and desires? We call ourselves the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we are subject to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But yet when it comes to our actions, we want to do as we please. We want everything to be about us. At that point in time, we need to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Him belongs the dominion, and to Him, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we completely submit, whether we understand it or not. Whether we understand it or not. Because there are certain things that you and I, we just don't comprehend. And an ayah that can be a source of peace for all of us is وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. And above every knowledgeable person, there is someone who is more knowledgeable. And above them all is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So something that you and I, we can't understand, we can't grasp the concept, I don't know why this is. At that point we say, Allah knows best. Allah knows best. I don't know why my parents are letting me eat these Oreos right now. I already went through one row, I only have 2 more rows left in the pack. But khair, my parents know best. I don't know why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this impermissible. A very plain, simple example. Someone asks you at work, oh hey, why is pork not allowed in your religion? What's wrong with pork? I wake up every morning, bacon and eggs. I can't have a breakfast without no bacon. Right? Well, why is that? Oh, well, let me tell you something about pork. Do you know how unhealthy it is to eat pork on a daily basis? Let me pull up some stats for you. Let me tell you how filthy the pig is. Let me tell you this. Let me tell you, it could lead to heart disease. None of that. Why is it haram? Why is it impermissible? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said so. One rule that we should all understand is that rulings do not revolve around the wisdom, but rather they revolve around the ruling itself, around the illah. Around the illah. Not around the hikam. Not around the wisdoms. You don't need a wisdom for something in order to understand why it's permissible or why it's impermissible. It's enough for us to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us so. It's enough for us to know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has made it so. وَمَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُ. Whatever the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prescribed, hold on to that steadfastly. And whatever the Prophet ﷺ has forbade and told us to stay away from, we stay away from it. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us the ability to understand everything that was said, inshallah, and any good that was said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah alone, and anything that I may have said that was wrong or incorrect, that is from my own nafs and from the shaitan. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم خيرا. Any questions? You guys do Q&A or? Huh? Yeah, you do? Okay, so any questions, if any brothers have any questions, inshallah. Don't ask me about how to get free McDonald's. I don't know the answer to that. Yes.
So, I know we touched it on it at the end, but talking about LGBTQ issues in the West where a lot of libertarian, leftist ideas were talking about religion as a non-starter for them. So, when we kind of talk about LGBT,
If we could make one. Yeah.
and they just rely on, I'm talking about non-Muslims,
Right.
religion is not a starter.
Right.
Just relying on data, laws being passed, that
Right.
homosexuality.
Right.
What can we do to address those situations that bring conflict?
Right. So for people who that's one of the biggest issues. So for people who don't believe in religion, they say, well, your code of ethics means nothing to us. Your code of ethics means nothing. Your Quran, your whatever it is, it doesn't mean anything to us. So we won't be able to convince them using that model anyways. So what you do is, we have to use their own logic against them. We have to use their own logic against them. When it comes to data about homosexuality, or it comes to data about any of these things, we'll find that the data is not, it doesn't really work in their favor. And as I mentioned about Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamid, he mentions in his article, Islam and Homosexuality, it's a good read. I recommend that everyone read it. He talks about how no data has actually been found, or no studies have actually been conducted in regards to finding out whether or not this is genetic. So that's one issue. And the other issue is you kind of have to use their logic against them. So for those same individuals who say, well, I'll just give you an example, who say, well, what's wrong with two individuals who love each other? What's wrong with them being together? So we say, okay, use that same logic, and let me ask you, what's wrong if I want to spend the rest of my life with a chicken? Right? I'm giving a very comical example, but a more serious example would be what? What's wrong if I want to spend the rest of my life with a sibling of mine? And then they'll well, that's a little bit, well, why? The two individuals, they love each other, well, why can't they spend the rest of their lives together? So you'll find a lot of times that's where they kind of pull back and they say, well, that we really don't have an answer to. And you'll find Freud and all of these thinkers, the Darwinism, a lot of their ideologies are built off of these individuals who scientists, who they hold in high regard. So we could kind of use the same argument and say, well, just as you don't really hold our code of ethics to any type of standard, I don't really hold what you guys are saying to any type of standard. And even if I did, if I use your argument, this is how I would counter that argument. And they really don't have an answer for that. Like you look at debates between atheists and Muslims. One of the biggest their biggest pitfalls is the thing that I mentioned to you. So they really don't have an answer for that. And the story that I had mentioned about Ariel Castro, the same thing could be said about, unfortunately, about pedophilia as well, right? Society deems that to be wrong. Society deems that to be completely, blasphemous. But who's making those rules? Who comes up with those ethics? Who comes up with those morals? Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Right. Right, for sure. Right, right, right. Right, I mean, then it's the same thing. I mean, I would say two, adults who are siblings, what if they consent? If you ask them the same question, well, okay, what if, brother and sister, they're consenting adults, what's wrong with that? They'll be like, well, that's different. Well, why is that different? Is it because society says it's different? There are some instances that there have been some records of certain societies accepting that, and that actually being the norm. But these individuals won't accept that, or if then they're pushed into a corner in which they have to say, well, yeah, that's okay too. And the vast majority of people will say, more than 90% of the people will say, that's not okay. But when you say that that's not okay, or that's ethically wrong, what are you basing that off of? So that's when they kind of back themselves into a corner. Yes? Sure. Right. Right. Exactly. Right. Right. I mean, and the way the brother, you mentioned that a few years prior, 15, 20 years ago, the homosexuality was actually considered a mental illness, correct? So, and listed along with pedophilia, listed along with incest and all these other things. But now that has been obviously removed from that area of the book and has been put somewhere else. So what's to say 10, 15 years down the line, incest is not the next to follow, or something else is going to follow. And that's ultimately what the Prophet ﷺ had told us. That's how the end of times will be. That you'll find, the best of people will be those who tell a mother and a son that to do whatever they're doing on the side of the road and not on the road. I mean, that's where society is heading towards, ultimately. And the Prophet ﷺ has already told us that in a hadith. These are the words of the Prophet ﷺ, where I shouldn't have to shy away from mentioning such things. So the Prophet ﷺ, if he himself has told us that this is where society will go, there's no telling in the next few years what's going to happen. Sure. Looking at I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Okay, sure. Sure. Uh-huh. So a brother asked, it's this kind of mentality is pushed forward by leftists, mostly Democrats. So would it be okay to vote for? Would it be better to vote for Republicans or Trump or such? Well, the answer to that question is I plead the fifth. So I'm just going to go ahead and plead the fifth on that one. I'm not going to sway you to each side, any side. That's something that it's such a nuanced issue that every person that you ask will probably have a completely different opinion, and I just don't want to open up I don't want to open that can of worms, inshallah.
Some people attribute these tendencies to
Sure.
shaitan, it's coming from them because it goes against the fitra, the natural.
Right.
Is that the right way to look at it?
Brother asks, is like, are these things from shaitan? Are these is that where it's coming from? And to answer your question, there is a certain society that obviously wants these things to spread because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it himself in the Quran. He says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُحِبُّونَ أَن تَشِيعَ الْفَاحِشَةُ فِي الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Those who love that fuhsh, that lewdness spreads throughout the Muslims, throughout the believers, for them is a painful torment in this world and the next. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about them, that must mean that this society exists. So their whole purpose is so you have the whole argument of theism and you have the whole argument of deism. So you have the argument of religion versus, you have theist versus atheist. And in that argument, there are a group of people who don't want religion to be there at all, which is the separation of church and state, and then to completely separate the two things altogether. And the hope is that once they're separated, then one won't even act on the religion. So there is a group of people out there that do want this to happen, but can those individuals be spurned by shaitan? Can those individuals, their goals, their objectives, can they be influenced by shaitan? Of course, for sure. And we have an example of this during the time of the Prophet ﷺ from an authentic narration in which shaitan came and presented himself in the form of a man where the non-Muslims, they were sitting down and they had a council as to what we should do in regards to this man Muhammad. What should we do about him? And shaitan came in the form of a man and he himself pushed forth the idea that we should kill this man. We should end his life. And he put forth the plan that this is how it should be done. You know, when the Muslims, they leave the city, go to his house, and the Prophet ﷺ left Ali radiallahu anh there, and that whole story that we have. So shaitan, of course, throughout the course of time, this is something that is well within his ability. Yes. Sure. Uh-huh.
Second question is, as far as feminism is concerned, obviously there's like the Western feminism, but I think
Right.
you're addressing more of Eastern feminism or whatever the
Mhm.
side of it is. It might address things like, questions that sisters might have that they're not able to pose,
Mhm.
right? What about that kind of feminism, as far as eradicating or addressing some of the injustices that are more common in our community?
Sure. Sure. So the first question was in regards to, yeah. Okay. Okay, inshallah. So this is the last question. Sorry, whoever wrote this. So the question was, what should one do about, okay, so you have the tendency for a certain individual and you don't act on that tendency, but what about the emotional baggage that is associated with that? So in that regard as well, even the emotional attachment that is associated with it, a person should abstain from that. It should not, because to even cultivate that or to even let that seed itself into your mind, that in and of itself that distracts from a lot of things, from ibadah, from your own family, from what you should be doing, which is trying to find a spouse from the opposite gender. So that even that emotional baggage should also be cut off. It should be removed. And then the second question that the brother had, and inshallah this is the last one, it's a good one. So the feminism that we see today is obviously, whatever the West puts forth. But what about, supposed quote unquote feminism back home or over towards the east, where you find women basically fighting for their basic rights, really, where you have women fighting for inheritance, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already prescribed, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already mentioned in the Quran. You have women, with their husbands asking for certain things, or being able to work, or whatever it may be. Those things are all societal. So that doesn't, just because they happen in an Islamic country doesn't necessarily mean that Islam condones that, or that's the way that things should be. Rather, we need to reform, and we need to look at our society within the lens of the Quran. So anything that is happening that is not approved by the Quran, even if it's like cultural or societal, then that's something that we should definitely remove. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're pushing forth feminism. Rather, we're actually just arguing for the rights of women that were put forth by the Prophet ﷺ and by the Quran itself. Inshallah. And I think that. Anyway, Jazakumullahu Khairun wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah. اللهم لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين واجعلنا من المهديين اللهم اهدنا واهد بنا واجعلنا سواء سبيلا لمن اهتدى ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم
Assalamualaikum. I just want to thank Maulana Shabazz for coming. Inshallah, we do hope to invite him again, so we apologize for cutting the questions and answers short, but if you're interested in this topic and topics like this, inshallah, we are having our winter intensive this December. During the winter break, December 21st to 25th. We're going to be discussing issues like this and atheism and other modernisms and a lot of different topics. We'll have Mufti Minhaj, Mufti Azim, a number of other teachers also coming to educate us on these topics. So please register for that. Registration is now available.